So one of the things that's been coming up a lot lately is people talking about hope, faith, losing hope, running out of faith, so on and so forth. And to clarify, what that really is pointing to is some sense of something going to happen in this mystical, magical, imaginary future. To be really direct, the best approach here is to absolutely lose hope. Because if we are hinging on hope, we're no longer allowing ourselves to be present with what is. Hope and faith are not a requirement here. Just similarly to how motivation is not a requirement to be engaged. If we allow ourselves to become codependent on a sense of hope, a sense of some sort of future event, some sort of outcome, some sort of goal, we are missing the point. The point is here. The moment is here, the experience is here. And so instead of allowing ourselves to overlay with some sense of hope, be with this here and now. And you will begin to see that hope isn't a requirement. Instead, it's actually more of an obscuration. So to become hopeless, I know that feeling is often described as something extremely painful. Yet that's kind of the point, is to get to a place where we aren't relying on anything that doesn't exist. Instead, we are absolutely just immersed in our experience here and now. The moment shows us. The moment isn't an object, it's a current, which is a powerful word because current is something that is obviously very present, yet it is also something dynamic, and it is also something that pulls us. It is something that moves us. To allow the current to be the momentum. That is essentially the path. To peel away the layers of obscuration. Or, maybe more accurately, to allow those layers to peel away on their own. The more we engage with what we experience sensationally, the less likely this overlay of mind and thought can interfere. So, let go of hope. You don't need hope. This is the way to see how things are, and you might begin to get a sense that everything is perfectly fine the way it is. No matter how it may be illustrated through the narrative, that everything right here, right now is actually perfectly okay. Everything is exactly the way it should be. It can't be any other way. And the only time that we could entertain it being anything else is with more thought, with more narrative, with hope. This also begins to kind of blend a little bit into a sense of helplessness. It's strange how hope and motivation and feeling like we can help or make choices for ourselves, those particular pieces are connected. Helplessness is an aspect of innocence. At first glance, that taste of innocence is that which we can't do anything to or with or manipulate or change or alter in any way. And at first glance, when it comes to the mind, that can be a very painful experience. Yet ultimately, that seems to be the case, that this is just the way it is, and that the way we feel is just the way we feel. And this experience cannot be really altered at all. And if we look at what alteration really looks like, anything that we are essentially doing, or any choices or any aspect of agency that we're experiencing or taking, is actually some sort of modification for a future event, pretty much every time. In the moment, nothing changes, but we manipulate for some sort of future outcome, and that becomes a very addictive experience. So, just as an experiment, see if you can allow yourself to be a lot more present and to have less of an effect on any potential future moment. Because what you might begin to see is that the narrative is overlaying itself entirely. The sense of agency we have comes upon reflection of the experience. And that agency is also overlaying itself into some sort of future outcome, and that's really interesting too. In other words, in the moment, nothing can be done. We are just stillness. And we can find ourselves being moved, but we can't move ourselves in the moment. We don't make choices in the moment. That's all some sort of past projection into future experience. And it's definitely very strongly oriented with some sort of narrative. So, to allow ourselves to enter into a space of feeling something that we can't change, that can be excruciating. A lot of this is coming down to some sort of fundamental resistance that we could just call ego or identity. It's really just a sense of resistance, a sense that something can be pushed against. And that's what's the most interesting, is we get closer and closer and closer, and we begin to realize there's nothing that can be pushed against. That just even logically ceases to make sense. It just cannot happen. In the moment, nothing can actually change. Nothing can be changed. It is just the way it is. And if it changes, we're with that. And if we're with that in such an intense form of in-syncness, we find ourselves completely in sync. We have a sense that it's exactly always been this way. That's the remarkable part. We don't have a sense of change because we're not comparing to a temporal previous moment or something that could happen potentially in the future. We are just so in sync in the moment that it actually has a very powerful sense of it always being just like this. And that kind of familiarity is pervasive, and it soaks in to our being. And remarkably not individually. It makes us feel absolutely connected, not apart, complete whole. And not whole apart, whole together. It's pretty powerful. And any of you who've had that kind of glimpse or that type of awakening know exactly what this pointing is pointing to. If we allow ourselves to orient toward what is here now, we can feel it. It has a sensational quality to it. And the closer we get, the less we have a sense of being able to compare any past or future moment, any of these imaginary experiences. And if we're not comparing, we're absolutely in such a powerful form of sync that it's just always this, just like this. We can't know any previous moment. We can't know any moment of possible future. It's just this. It's worthwhile to at least experiment with. I know that intellectually this could be challenging. It might not make sense. There's a lot of paradox here. To at least experiment, give yourself the benefit of the doubt, and to come closer and closer to the sensations, to the sensational experience, to the point where you allow yourself to basically be in the midst of a flow state. These things become rather clear on their own. And so the pointing is just a gentle nudging here. Take some steps into stillness. I know that sounds ironic. Be absolutely still. Open up absolutely to listening. And notice any obscuration that shows up in the emotional sense, in the integrative sense, in the deepest parts of what seems to be held. And you will know that those obscurations are essentially pivot points for some sense of comparison, some sense of reference, some sense of contrast. That contrast itself is essentially the very crux of suffering itself. Dig in. Get into those parts where it feels contracted here, where maybe there's a story, which is actually okay to approach. As long as we don't allow ourselves to fixate and use it as another pivot point, that story can become a portal into allowing ourselves to feel, and we express and we purge and we have this moment. And then in the midst of that, there is absolute silence and clarity. And that can become pervasive. We just keep engaging, keep going. It's interesting to become what we seem to objectify, to become those experiences, sensations, to become any type of experience. We are somehow neutralizing that sense of contrast, that sense of reference, and in that we become this. We are settled into what we could just call consciousness. And even then, that is another object. We wouldn't even know it. And we can't know it. The innocence here is away from knowledge. It's away from some sort of certainty. It's away from another point of contrast and reference. It is directly into the mix of the expression of that which is arising. It is unbound. It is untied. It doesn't have a point. It doesn't have a sense of solidity. The strange part about this is oftentimes the term come home shows up here, and coming home is not a singular place. It is always here. To come home is to deeply step into the current, the present, that which is dynamic and moving, that which pulls us. So it's okay to let go of hope. It's okay to allow ourselves to become helpless. And in these moments, a clarity arises. Go to the place where you are afraid to be broken, because that place is exactly what's been calling. And in that experience, you may begin to see something that loses reference and just makes us very clear. This, all of it, no matter what the appearance, is perfect the way it is. And that must include us, but not a part, as this. Play with it. Keep going. Keep swimming. Dig into those difficult places as often as possible. And somehow by walking through what seems to be a contraction, we find that there's no way to know if we like it or not, if it hurts or not, if we're experiencing it or not, if we're observing it or not. This is beyond observer. It's difficult because a lot of people will ask, well, how do I become it? And that really cannot be pointed to. You already know. What we can say, though, is from here, it's a matter of play and exploration. Imagine having a board of buttons and levers and things like that right in front of you, and you just begin to push buttons and switch levers, and that's the type of experimentation and play that we engage with these sensational experiences. Some people will say, well, should I let it overcome me, or should I somehow shrink and go inside of it? And really the most honest answer is both. Do both. Play it all. Maybe a third example arises intuitively, maybe fourth, fifth, sixth, so on and so forth. This is where the only pointing is life itself, or we could even say self-pointing. That's where this goes. As pointers, we only nudge. And we only nudge as part of a game, but not to know anything above or beyond, or to be in a position above or beyond. There's no hierarchy in that way. It's just a reminder. And the funny part is, it almost feels like there's this communication with ourselves in some way. I say this to people sometimes, that at some point you realize that you've been having this conversation with yourself the entire time. And it can be like that. So, take some of those steps to go into those places where you don't want to look. I mean, this is essentially the shadow. The places where we don't want to look. Doesn't have to be hard. Doesn't have to be. But there's something there that's going to be wanting to distract you from that. And the more protests, the more likely that there's something that wants to remain hidden. Go to the places that are hidden. And just see what happens. But you don't need hope. You don't need faith. You don't need motivation. And you certainly don't need to have a sense of agency here. It's just a stepping into the threshold of this experience, instead of shying away from that which feels like it's too much. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's just a false perception entirely. Who knows? Maybe you'll discover something interesting along the way.